How does it kill? I asked, leaning forward despite myself. There are stories of 3 ways, Dimitri continued. First, it can spit poison, a corrosive venom that burns through flesh and causes death within minutes. Second, it can generate an electric shock like lightning that can kill from several feet away. And third, he paused, glancing at Batu, who nodded for him to continue. Third, some say that merely touching it means certain death, that its skin carries poison or electricity or something else, something worse that has no name. That's physically impossible, Chen said, but his voice lacked conviction. No organism could generate sufficient electrical charge to— Electric eels do it, Pembroke interrupted. Not to that degree, perhaps, but the principle exists in nature. In water, Chen countered. Not in a desert environment. The moisture content alone. We saw the track, I said quietly, and that ended the debate. We had seen something that had heated sand to the point of crystallization. That was fact, not folklore. Weatherby stood and walked to the edge of our firelight, staring out into the darkness. Tomorrow we'll investigate more thoroughly. If there's a creature out here, we'll document it properly. Photograph it if possible. That's what we came here to do, expand the boundaries of human knowledge. And if it's dangerous? I asked. He patted his revolver. Then we'll deal with it accordingly. We're not helpless, gentlemen. We have weapons, we have intelligence, and we have each other. Whatever's out there, it's just an animal. And animals can be understood, categorized, and if necessary, eliminated. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. The first watch was assigned to Weatherby and one of the Mongolian guides. The rest of us retired to our tents, though I doubt any of us truly slept. I lay in my bedroll, listening to the night sounds, the crackle of the fire, the whisper of wind across sand, the occasional murmur of voices from those on watch. And then, around what I estimated to be 2 in the morning, I heard it again. The singing. It was closer this time, much closer and more distinct. It wasn't quite human, yet it wasn't entirely inhuman either. It existed in some uncanny valley between the two. A voice that almost formed words but not quite. A melody that almost made sense but remained just beyond comprehension. I heard movement outside, others emerging from their tents. By the time I'd pulled on my boots and grabbed my rifle, everyone was awake and gathered near the fire. The singing was coming from multiple directions now, surrounding us. It would start from the northwest, continue for perhaps 30 seconds, then stop. After a moment of silence, it would resume from a different direction, east, then south, then north. It was as if something were circling our camp, taking its time, announcing its presence. What in God's name? Pembroke breathed, his face pale in the firelight. Batu was speaking rapidly in Mongolian, his voice urgent. Dimitri translated in fragments. Don't respond. Don't make sound. It's testing. It wants to know. Wants to know what? Weatherby demanded, his revolver drawn and pointing at shadows. If we're prey or predator. If we're afraid. Dr. Chun had his rifle raised, sweeping it back and forth as the singing moved around us. It's impossible. One creature couldn't move that fast, not through sand. Maybe it's not one creature, I said, and everyone fell silent at that thought. The singing continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. It never came close enough for us to see what was making it, staying just beyond the reach of our firelight. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was profound and oppressive. We stood there, weapons ready, hearts pounding, waiting for something to emerge from the darkness. But nothing came. The night stretched on, empty and vast, and gradually the terror began to give way to exhaustion. We should leave, I said finally. At first light, we should pack up and head back. We have enough data, enough maps. Whatever's out here is exactly what we came to find. Weatherby interrupted, but there was something in his voice now, a brittleness that hadn't been there before. We're on the verge of a discovery that could change everything we know about desert fauna. We can't just abandon. It was mimicking us, Chun said suddenly. We all turned to look at him. He was still staring out into the darkness, his rifle lowered. That singing, those weren't random sounds. It was taking human voices and distorting them, trying them out, like it was learning how to sound human. The implications of that hung in the air like smoke. If he was right, if the thing out there could mimic human voices, then how would we know what was real? How would we know if a call for help was genuine or a trap? Pembroke laughed. A high, nervous sound. That's insane. You're saying this worm, this creature, is intelligent? That it's studying us? I'm saying, Chun replied slowly, that we need to be very, very careful about what we assume we understand. The rest of the night passed without incident, though none of us slept. We sat around the fire as it burned down to embers, feeding it constantly, keeping the darkness at bay. The Mongolian guides maintained their own vigil, occasionally chanting in low voices, prayers or protective spells. I couldn't tell which. When dawn finally came, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold, it should have been a relief. But something had changed during the night. The land around us looked the same, yet felt fundamentally different, as though we'd crossed some invisible threshold and couldn't find our way back. At breakfast, Weatherby called a meeting. Gentlemen, we need to make a decision. Do we continue northwest, following the trail of this creature, or do we return to Ulaanbaatar? We continue, Chun said immediately, and I was surprised by the fervor in his voice. This could be the discovery of the century. A completely unknown species, possibly demonstrating intelligence, definitely possessing unique characteristics. We have a responsibility to science. We have a responsibility to survive. I interrupted. Last night proved this thing, whatever it is hunting us. It's not just some animal we happen to stumble across. It's tracking us, studying us, trying to understand us. And I don't think its intentions are friendly. Based on what? Weatherby challenged. Some sounds in the night? For all we know, it was just as frightened of us as we were of it. Animals make all sorts of vocalizations. That wasn't an animal, Pembroke said quietly. He'd been uncharacteristically silent all morning, and now he spoke with absolute certainty. I've been around the world photographing wildlife. I've heard lions, elephants, every manner of creature in Africa. That wasn't an animal, James. That was something else. The argument continued for another hour, with Weatherby and Chun insisting we press on, while Pembroke and I advocated for retreat. The deciding vote ultimately came from the Mongolian guides. Batu stood and spoke at length, his voice carrying the weight of age and experience. Dmitri translated. He says his contract was to guide us to the edge of the known territory and back. He's fulfilled that contract. The edge has been reached. Now he and his men will return to Ulaanbaatar. They're leaving at midday with or without us. He says they've seen enough to know this place is cursed, and they won't stay another night. We'll pay triple, Weatherby said immediately. Quadruple. Name your price. But Batu shook his head, speaking just two words that Dmitri translated simply, no price. There are some things, his expression said, that all the money in the world can't compensate for. We had a choice to make. Return with the guides to civilization, or continue alone into unknown territory, hunting something that might already be hunting us. You can probably guess which option we chose. After all, I'm telling you this story, aren't I? If we turned back, there would be nothing to tell, just another failed expedition, a footnote in the archives of the Royal Geographical Society. But we didn't turn back. God help us, we didn't turn back. By noon, the guides had packed their belongings and were ready to depart. Batu came to each of us, pressing one of his leather amulets into our hands. Protection, Dmitri translated. Not enough, but something. He says to wear them always, and if you hear your name called in the night, don't answer. Whatever calls to you with your voice, with your mother's voice, with your friend's voice, it's not them. Never answer. We watched them disappear across the horizon, for small figures growing smaller, until they were just dots and then nothing at all. And then we were alone, 6 men, standing in the vastness of the Gobi Desert, having just been warned by people who knew this land not to trust our own ears. Right then, Weatherby said with forced cheer, Let's pack up and move out. We have daylight, and I want to cover as much ground as possible before we make camp tonight. As we broke down the tents and loaded our supplies, I kept touching the amulet Batu had given me, feeling its weight against my chest beneath my shirt. It was a small thing, probably filled with herbs or blessed sand or something else that shouldn't matter to a rational man. But I wore it anyway. We headed northwest, following the general direction where we'd seen the track. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became intense, but we pressed on. Dr. Chun was taking samples constantly now, soil, rock, anything that might provide clues about the creature's habitat. Pembroke photographed everything, his earlier nervousness replaced by a manic energy. It was around mid-afternoon when we found the second track. This one was fresher than the first, the edges still sharp, the darkened sand still warm to the touch. And it wasn't just one track. There were multiple trails, crisscrossing each other, creating a pattern that looked almost deliberate. "It's been circling," I said, tracing the patterns with my finger. "These tracks, they loop around and around, like it's been patrolling this area. Or marking territory," Chin added, kneeling to examine the sand more closely. "Many predators establish boundaries. Perhaps this is similar behavior." "Then we're in its territory," Pembroke said flatly. "We've entered the creature's domain, and it knows we're here." Weatherby ignored this, instead consulting his compass and maps. "We'll make camp there," he said, pointing to a cluster of larger rocks about half a mile distant. "High ground, good visibility. We'll post watches, keep the fire burning, and in the morning we'll set up observation positions. If this creature is active in this area, we'll see it eventually." "And then what?" I asked. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "Then we document it, Edmund. We take photographs, we make observations, we record everything. That's what we came here to do. And if it attacks, then we defend ourselves." His hand moved to his revolver again. "But it's just an animal. And animals, no matter how unusual, follow predictable patterns. We just need to understand those patterns." I wanted to argue, to insist that we turn back, to point out that every instinct I had was screaming at me that we were in danger. But I was the junior member of this expedition, the cartographer, not the leader. So I nodded and followed. We made camp as the sun began to set, working quickly to establish our perimeter before darkness fell. The rocks offered some shelter, but they also created shadows, deep, black pools where anything could hide. Every time the wind shifted, sending sand skittering across stone, we jumped. As night fell, we built an enormous fire, using precious fuel to create a blaze that pushed back the darkness for dozens of yards. We arranged ourselves around it, weapons ready, trying to ignore how small and vulnerable we felt under that vast sky. "Let me ask you something," Pembroke said, breaking a long silence. "If this creature is as dangerous as the legends say, why haven't we heard about it before? Why isn't it documented in any scientific literature?" "Because everyone who encounters it dies," I said quietly. "Or they survive and tell stories that no one believes. Like we didn't believe." "The Mongolians believe," Chun pointed out. "They've built an entire mythology around it. Warnings passed down through generations. That suggests multiple encounters over time, doesn't it? A consistent pattern of experience." Or, Weatherby countered, "It suggests a successful propagation of folklore designed to keep people away from certain areas. Perhaps there are valuable minerals here, or sacred sites, or—" He stopped mid-sentence. We all heard it. A voice calling from the darkness. Clear and distinct and utterly terrifying because we recognized it. It was Batu's voice. "Help!" it called in heavily accented English. "Help me, please." We stared at each other, frozen. Batu was hours away by now, long gone, heading back to safety with the other guides. Whatever was out there calling to us with his voice wasn't him. "Don't respond," Chun whispered, echoing Batu's warning from that morning. "Don't answer. Help." The voice called again, from a different direction now. "Please." I felt hurt. It was moving, circling us, trying different approaches. The voice was perfect, Every inflection, every nuance of Badu's accent. If we hadn't known he was gone, we would have believed it was him. Then the voice changed. Edmund. It was my mother's voice now, and my blood turned to ice. Edmund, darling, where are you? I can't find you in the dark. My mother had been dead for 3 years. I'd been at her bedside when she passed, holding her hand, watching the light leave her eyes. And now something out in the Gobi Desert was using her voice to call to me. Jesus Christ, Pembroke breathed, his face white. How is it doing that? How does it know? James, help me. Another voice, female, younger. Weatherby made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. I didn't know who the woman was. Wife? Sister? Daughter? But the effect on him was immediate and devastating. It's reading us somehow, Chun said, his scientific mind trying desperately to rationalize the impossible. Body language, facial expressions, some kind of sensory ability we don't understand. Nigel! My own voice this time, calling from the darkness. Nigel, I found it. I found the creature. Bring your camera, quickly. We looked at Pembroke, then at each other, the horror of the situation sinking in fully. Not only could the creature mimic voices we knew, but it could mimic our own voices. If we separated, if anyone walked away from the fire, how would we know if they returned? How would we know if the person standing next to us was who they appeared to be? The voices continued through the night, an endless parade of the dead and distant, each one perfectly rendered, each one designed to lure us away from safety. My mother, again and again. Weatherby's mystery woman. Chen's father, speaking in Cantonese. Pembroke's brother, who I later learned had died in the war. And mixed in with the personal voices were our own, calling to each other with increasing urgency. Edmund, I need help with the equipment. Dr. Chun, come quickly. I've made a discovery. Captain Weatherby, we're under attack. We sat there through the long night, weapons drawn, not speaking, barely breathing, while the darkness around us rippled with stolen voices. Every instinct screamed at us to respond, to help, to investigate. But we didn't. We couldn't, because we'd been warned. And now we understood exactly what Bada had meant. Whatever calls to you, it's not them. When dawn finally came, we were exhausted, traumatized, but alive. The voices had stopped with the first rays of sunlight, fading away like nightmares before consciousness. We looked at each other with hollow eyes, and I knew we were all thinking the same thing. How many more nights could we survive? The morning after the voices brought no relief, only a grim acknowledgement of what we were facing. We sat around the dying embers of our fire, hollow-eyed and silent, each man lost in his own thoughts about what he'd heard in the darkness. Weatherby was the first to speak, though his voice lacked its usual authority. We need to discuss what happened last night. Rationally, scientifically, rationally. Pembroke let out a bitter laugh. James, that thing out there used my dead brother's voice. It knew his name. It knew the exact tone he used when he called me Nige. How do you rationally explain that? Dr. Chun removed his spectacles and cleaned them, a nervous habit I'd noticed increasing over the past days. There are animals with remarkable mimicry abilities. Lyrebirds can replicate complex sounds. Parrots can learn human speech. Perhaps this creature has evolved an extreme version of that capability. But how does it know which voices to use? Oppressed. How does it know about our dead? About people we've never mentioned out loud? The silence that followed was answer enough. We had no explanation that didn't venture into territory that our scientific minds refused to accept. Weatherby stood abruptly, pacing the perimeter of our camp. Right? Here's what we're going to do. We're not fleeing like frightened children, but we are going to be systematic about this. We'll spend today establishing observation posts, documenting everything we can about this creature's behavior. Tonight, we implement new protocols. No one responds to any voice outside our immediate visual confirmation. We tie ourselves together if we have to, and tomorrow morning, we make our decision about whether to continue or retreat. It was a compromise that satisfied no one but gave us something to do besides sit and wait for nightfall. We spent the day arranging rocks into barriers, setting up Pembroke's camera equipment at strategic points and taking careful notes about the terrain. Chun collected more samples, though I noticed his hands shook slightly as he worked. Around midday, we discovered something that changed everything. I was sketching the surrounding area, updating my maps, when I noticed an irregularity in the landscape about 100 yards to the northeast. What I'd initially taken for a natural depression was too uniform, too deliberately shaped. When I brought it to the others' attention, we approached cautiously, weapons ready. It was a pit, roughly circular, perhaps 15 feet across and impossible to determine the depth from the rim. The sides were smooth, almost glassy in places, and that same darkened, heat-crystallized sand lined the edges. "It's a den," Chin breathed, kneeling carefully at the edge. "Or perhaps a trap. Look at how the sides are angled inward. Anything that fell in would have difficulty climbing out." Weatherby picked up a rock and dropped it into the pit. We counted 1 second, 2, 3, 4, before we heard a distant thud. At least 40 feet deep, maybe more. "There could be more of these," Pembroke said, scanning the ground around us with new wariness. "Hidden under a thin layer of sand. We could be walking over them without knowing." The thought was terrifying. The ground itself couldn't be trusted. As we backed away from the pit, I saw something that made me freeze. There, in the sand near the rim, was a mark. Not a track, not a trail, but something else, a symbol, perhaps, or a pattern. It was made of small stones arranged deliberately, and it looked disturbingly similar to the protective symbols Batu had drawn around the guide's camp. "Someone's been here before," I said quietly. "Someone who knew what they were dealing with." We found 3 more pits that afternoon, each carefully positioned to form a rough perimeter around an area of maybe half a square mile. Whatever the creature's territory was, we were standing in the middle of it. As the sun began its descent, our movements became more frantic. We reinforced our camp, built up the fire pit with additional stones, and arranged our supplies so we could grab essential items quickly if we needed to flee. Every action was accompanied by glances at the horizon, checking and rechecking for any sign of movement. Dr. Chun had become obsessed with understanding the creature's abilities. As we worked, he theorized aloud. Electric eels generate electricity through specialized cells called electrocytes. If this organism has evolved something similar, adapted for a terrestrial environment, it could theoretically produce a significant charge. The moisture in the sand after rare rainfall, minerals in the soil conducting electricity. "Stop," Weatherby said sharply. "Just stop. I don't care about the mechanism. I care about how we survive it." It was the first time I'd heard him admit fear so openly. Night fell like a curtain, sudden and absolute. We lit the fire early, feeding it constantly, creating a beacon of light in the vast darkness. And then we waited. The voices began earlier this time, while the last traces of twilight still stained the western sky. They started with whispers, barely audible, growing gradually louder as full darkness descended. But tonight was different. Tonight, the creature wasn't just mimicking. It was conversing. "Edmund," my mother's voice called. "Edmund, I'm so cold. Won't you help me?" Before I could stop myself, I opened my mouth to respond. Chen's hand clamped over it instantly, his eyes wide with warning. I nodded, and he slowly released me. "Why won't you answer?" the voice continued, and there was something wrong with it now, the inflection slightly off, like someone reading a script without understanding the emotion. "Don't you love your mother? Don't you care that I'm suffering?" "It's trying to provoke a response," Chen whispered, testing different approaches. The voice changed tactics. Edmund Hartley, age 29, born in Sheffield, educated at Oxford, employed by the Royal Geographical Society. Every detail was correct. "Your mother, Catherine Hartley, died 3 years ago of consumption. You were holding her hand. Her last words were, 'Be brave.' Do you remember, Edmund?" I did remember. Every detail was perfect, intimate, impossible for anyone to know unless they'd been there. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my rifle. "How?" Pembroke breathed. "How can it know these things?" But the voices weren't finished with me. "You've been having dreams about her, haven't you, Edmund?" Dreams where she's alive, where you can save her. But you can't save anyone. Not her. Not yourself. Not your friends. You're all going to die out here, and no one will ever know what happened to you. The psychological warfare was deliberate, calculated. The creature wasn't just hunting us. It was breaking us down, exploiting our fears, our guilt, our grief. Then it turned its attention to Weatherby. James. The female voice from the previous night called. James, please. I forgive you. I forgive you for everything. Just come to me. Let me hold you one more time. Weatherby's face crumpled. He stood, and for a horrifying moment, I thought he was going to walk into the darkness. Chun and I grabbed his arms, holding him back. It's not her, Chun said urgently. James, listen to me. It's not her. How do you know? Weatherby's voice was raw, desperate. What if she's out there? What if she needs me? She's not out there, I said, shaking him. You know she's not. That thing is using your memories against you. Don't let it win. We held him until the moment passed, until some of the madness left his eyes. But the damage was done. We could all see it. The creature had found his weakness, and it would exploit it relentlessly. The night progressed in waves of psychological assault. The voices would attack one of us, trying different approaches. Pleading, threatening, reasoning, seducing. When one method failed, it would switch to another victim, another tactic. Dr. Chun heard his father speaking in Cantonese, recounting private family conversations that no one else should have known. Pembroke heard his brother describing their childhood, their secrets, their sins. And between the personal attacks, our own voices called to each other with increasing sophistication. Dr. Chun, I found something in my notes. Come look at this. I think I know how to kill it. Weatherby, one of the tents is on fire. Quickly. For God's sake, someone help me. It's got me. It's got me. Before we begin this tale of terror from the Gobi Desert, make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear every word of what happened to our expedition in the summer of 1912. My name is Edmund Hartley, and I served as the chief cartographer for the Andrews expedition, though that's not what we called it then. We were officially cataloging geological formations for the Royal Geographical Society, but our true purpose was far more ambitious: to map the uncharted regions of the Gobi Desert and document whatever mysteries lay hidden in those endless wastes of sand and stone. I remember the morning we departed from Ulaanbaatar with perfect clarity. The sky stretched overhead like hammered brass, and the air carried that peculiar quality of Central Asian summers, bone-dry and searing, yet somehow thin, as though the atmosphere itself had been stretched too tight across the world. Our caravan consisted of 12 men, 6 British scientists and surveyors, 4 Mongolian guides, and 2 Russian translators who'd been living in the region for decades. Captain James Weatherby led our expedition. He was a decorated veteran of the Boer Wars, a man whose spine seemed forged from the same iron as his resolve. Tall and lean, with a mustache waxed to sharp points, he moved through the world with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never encountered a problem that discipline and determination couldn't solve. I trusted him implicitly, which makes what happened later all the more difficult to reconcile. Dr. Albert Chun served as our naturalist and physician, a Cambridge-educated man of Chinese descent whose mind worked with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. He collected specimens in glass jars. Insects, plant samples, soil deposits. Everything had to be cataloged, labeled, documented. Science, he would say, is built on the foundation of meticulous observation. I can still hear his voice saying those words. Then there was Nigel Pembroke, our photographer, who lugged his heavy camera equipment across those burning sands with the devotion of a pilgrim carrying holy relics. We're making history, he'd insist whenever someone complained about the extra weight. Future generations will see what we saw. If only he'd known how right he was, and how much he'd wish he'd been wrong. Our Mongolian guides were led by a weathered man named Batu. His face looked like cracked leather left too long in the sun, deeply lined and darkened by decades under the merciless sky. He spoke little English, communicating mostly through our translator, Dmitri, but his eyes held a wariness that transcended language. I noticed it from the beginning. The way he'd scan the horizon at dawn and dusk. The way his hand would drift to the amulets hanging from his neck whenever the wind shifted direction. The first week of our journey passed in that peculiar monotony that comes from traveling through landscapes so vast they seem to erase time itself. Each day we'd rise before dawn, pack our camp, and push deeper into the desert. The land around us was neither entirely barren nor truly alive. It existed in some liminal state between the two, covered in sparse shrubs and scattered stones that looked as though they'd been dropped there by careless gods. Our routine became mechanical. Weatherby would consult his compass and maps, plotting our course. Dr. Chun would spend hours examining whatever specimens he'd collected the previous day. Pembroke would photograph rock formations and distant mountains, their peaks shimmering in the heat like mirages. And I would sketch, measure, and record, filling page after page of my journal with notations about elevation, terrain, and landmarks. The Mongolian guides kept to themselves mostly, speaking in their native tongue and preparing meals over small fires that they seemed to build more for ritual than warmth in that sweltering heat. They ate a fermented mare's milk that smelled like death and tasted worse. I tried it once on Dimitri's insistence and immediately regretted my curiosity. It was on the 8th day that things began to feel different. We'd made camp in the lee of a long ridge of rust-colored stone that rose from the desert floor like the spine of some buried leviathan. Batu had insisted on this location, even though it meant stopping 2 hours earlier than usual. When Weatherby questioned the decision, the old guide's response, filtered through Dimitri's translation, was simple and unsettling. "Bad place ahead. We camp here." "Bad how?" Weatherby pressed, his jaw set in that stubborn way that meant he wouldn't let the matter drop. Batu spoke at length, his hands gesturing toward the northwest, where the land seemed to flatten into an endless expanse of nothing. Dimitri listened, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable before translating. "He says there is a place beyond here, maybe 1 day's travel, where the nomads do not go. They call it Olgoi-Khorkhoi territory, the place of the death worm." We British exchanged glances. Dr. Chun adjusted his spectacles, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Death worm? Some local superstition, I presume." "It's more than superstition to them," Dimitri replied, his Russian accent thickening with discomfort. "The nomads have stories going back generations. They say there's a creature that lives beneath the sand, red, like blood, as thick as a man's arm and as long as a man is tall. They say it kills from a distance, that it spits poison and lightning." Pembroke actually laughed at this, a bright bark of amusement that echoed off the stone ridge behind us. "Lightning? My good man, that's physically impossible. What's next? Dragons breathing fire." But Weatherby wasn't laughing. He'd spent enough time in wild places to know that local legends usually had some kernel of truth buried within the exaggeration. "Ask him if he's ever seen one of these creatures," he instructed Dimitri. The exchange that followed was longer, more intense. Batu's face darkened, and he touched the amulets at his neck again. I counted 3 of them, small leather pouches that he wore like armor against invisible threats. "He says no, he has never seen one himself. But his grandfather did. His grandfather was traveling with a caravan, this was maybe 40 years ago, and they camped in the wrong place. In the morning, they found 2 men dead. No marks on them, no blood, nothing stolen. Just dead, with their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The silence that followed was profound. Even Pembroke had stopped smiling. And they attributed this to a worm?" Dr. Chun asked, his scientific skepticism struggling against something else in his voice, perhaps the first whisper of doubt. Dimitri continued translating as Batu spoke. "The tracks around the bodies, they were strange. Not footprints, but something that had moved through the sand like a snake, only heavier, leaving a trail as wide as a wagon wheel. And the sand itself was discolored, darkened, as though something had burned it from beneath." Weatherby made a decision then, one that I've replayed in my mind 1,000 times since. "We'll camp here tonight as Batu suggests, but tomorrow we continue northwest. We're not here to avoid places because of local folklore. We're here to explore, to document, to bring back knowledge." He turned to face all of us, his voice firm. "Gentlemen, we represent the British Empire and the pursuit of scientific truth. We will not be deterred by ghost stories. I should mention now, and I say this with the full weight of what came later, that I agreed with him completely in that moment. We all did, save perhaps for Dmitri, who'd gone pale during the translation. We were men of the modern age, armed with rifles and reason, standing on the cusp of the 20th century's second decade. We believed in what could be measured, weighed, and categorized. We believed we were the apex of civilization, venturing into the primitive unknown. We were fools. That night, as we sat around our campfire eating tinned beef and hardtack, the conversation turned to other legends of the region. It was Pembroke who brought it up, still amused by the afternoon's discussion, treating it all like grand entertainment. "So this death worm," he said, gesturing with a spoon, "does it have a name in the local tongue? Something suitably terrifying?" "Olgoi-Khorkhoi," Dmitri supplied. "It means intestine worm. They say it looks like the intestine of a cow, thick, red, segmented." Dr. Chun set down his tin cup with a thoughtful expression. "You know, there are species of worm-like creatures in various desert environments. The amphisbaenians, for instance, worm lizards. They're harmless, but I suppose to the untrained eye, they might seem threatening." "And the poison? The lightning?" I asked, playing along with the scientific explanation, grateful for it. "Exaggeration over generations," Chun replied with confidence. "Perhaps someone was bitten by a venomous snake in the vicinity of seeing one of these creatures, and the two became conflated in the retelling. As for lightning, well, static electricity can build up in dry environments. A coincidental discharge could easily be misinterpreted by superstitious minds." It all made perfect sense. We nodded, satisfied with these rational explanations, and the conversation drifted to other topics. The route ahead, supplies, the letters we'd write when we reached the next outpost. But I noticed that our Mongolian guides had moved their bedrolls closer together that night, and that Batu slept with one hand on his knife and the other clutching his amulets. I noticed how they positioned themselves so they could see the northwest horizon, and how they took turns staying awake, watching. I should have paid more attention to that. The wind picked up after midnight, carrying with it the peculiar smell of the Gobi. Dust and distance and something else I couldn't quite name. It was a lonely sound, that wind, moaning across the emptiness like the earth itself was grieving. I lay in my tent, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion, listening to that mournful dirge and thinking about intestine worms and dead men with terrified faces. Sometime before dawn, I heard singing. At first, I thought it was one of our guides, a low, melodious chant in their native language. But as I listened more carefully, something about it seemed wrong. The notes were too sustained, too perfect, almost mechanical in their precision. And they were coming from the wrong direction, not from our camp, but from somewhere out in the darkness to the northwest. I lay there, my heart beginning to pound, telling myself it was the wind, just the wind playing tricks with sound across the empty landscape. But the singing continued, rising and falling in a pattern that almost seemed to have words, though I couldn't make them out. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no distant animal sounds, nothing. Just a void of sound so complete it made my ears ring. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, Weatherby was calling for us to rise. Dawn had broken over the desert, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. The camp was already stirring, and the strangeness of the night seemed distant, almost dreamlike in the clear light of morning. At breakfast, I mentioned the singing to the others. "Probably one of the guides," Weatherby said dismissively, checking the straps on his pack. "They have their customs, their prayers." But when I asked Dmitri to inquire, Batu's response was immediate and vehement. None of them had been singing. None of them had made any sound after dark. It was forbidden, he said, in places like this. Making noise at night was an invitation. An invitation to what? Dr. Chun asked, his breakfast forgotten. Dmitri looked uncomfortable. He won't say, or perhaps there isn't a word for it in English, but he's asking, begging that we turn back. He says we've come far enough, that the maps we've made are sufficient, that there's nothing ahead worth finding. Weatherby's jaw set in that familiar stubborn line. Tell him we appreciate his concern, but we're continuing as planned. We'll pay him and the other guides double if they're worried about danger. Money, we thought, was the universal language. Money would keep them loyal. We were wrong about that too. Within an hour, we'd broken camp and were marching northwest again. The land ahead looked no different from the land behind. The same sparse vegetation, the same scattered stones, the same endless sky pressing down like a weight. But there was something in the air now, a tension that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and we were only now beginning to feel it. The Mongolian guides walked in tight formation, speaking to each other in urgent whispers. Dmitri stayed close to them, translating fragments when we asked, but mostly remaining silent. Even Pembroke had stopped his cheerful chatter, focusing instead on the horizon ahead with an expression I couldn't quite read. It was Dr. Chun who noticed it first, about 3 hours into our march. "The insects," he said suddenly, stopping in his tracks. "Where are the insects?" We all paused, looking around. He was right. The sparse vegetation should have been crawling with life. Beetles, flies, the small creatures that eked out existence in harsh environments. But there was nothing. No movement, no buzzing, no life at all except for us. "Perhaps it's the heat," I suggested, though even as I said it, I knew it was a weak explanation. "No," Chun replied, kneeling to examine a shrub. "Look at this. These plants are healthy. They're getting water from somewhere underground. There should be insects. There should be birds feeding on the insects. There should be evidence of rodents, of lizards, of something." But there was nothing. We pressed on, though the unease was growing now, becoming harder to ignore. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive, but it wasn't just physical discomfort that made us sweat. It was the wrongness of the place, the feeling that we were being watched by something that didn't have eyes, that we were walking into territory where we fundamentally didn't belong. By midday, even Weatherby's resolve seemed to be wavering. He called a halt for rest and water, and we gathered in the thin shade of our portable canvas shelter, no one speaking, all of us staring out at the vast emptiness surrounding us. That's when we saw the tracks. Pembroke spotted them first, pointing wordlessly at the sand about 20 yards from our position. We approached slowly, and I felt my stomach tighten as I saw what had caught his attention. Something had moved through here, something large. The track was perhaps 3 feet wide. A sinuous trail pressed into the sand as though an enormous snake had passed by. But it wasn't quite like a snake's trail. It was too uniform, too mechanical, and the sand on either side was darkened, as Badu's story had described. Dr. Chun knelt beside it, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his apprehension. He touched the darkened sand, then brought his fingers to his nose. "It's been heated," he said quietly. "Somehow the sand has been heated to the point of, I don't know, partial crystallization perhaps." "How recent?" Weatherby asked, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. Chun examined the track more carefully, noting how the wind had just barely begun to soften its edges. "Hours, maybe less." We all looked at each other, and in that moment, I saw the same thought reflected in every face. We were not alone out here. Batu was standing apart from us, and when I looked at him, I saw that he was praying, his lips moving silently as his fingers worked over his amulets. The other Mongolian guides had gathered behind him, their faces grave. "We should turn back," I said, and I wasn't ashamed to say it. "Whatever made that track is probably miles away by now," Weatherby interrupted, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Moving, hunting, doing whatever it does, the odds of encountering it are minimal." "And if we do encounter it?" Pembroke asked. His camera sat forgotten at his feet, and I realized he'd made no move to photograph the track. Weatherby had no answer for that. We stood there in the blazing sun, 6 educated British men and 4 Mongolian guides, staring at a track in the sand that shouldn't exist, made by something that shouldn't exist, and I knew with absolute certainty that we were about to make the worst decision of our lives. "We continue," Weatherby finally said, "but carefully, weapons ready. We'll make camp early today, somewhere defensible, and post watches through the night. In the morning, we'll reassess. It was a compromise, an attempt to balance scientific ambition with reasonable caution. It seemed rational at the time, but out there in the Gobi, beyond the edge of map territory, rationality was just another word we'd brought with us that meant nothing at all. We moved on, following a course that would take us parallel to the track but not directly across it. Every shadow made us jump. Every shift in the wind brought our heads around. The afternoon stretched out like warm taffy, time itself seeming to slow under the weight of our fear. And as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood and amber, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there was watching us, waiting with infinite patience for night to fall. We had no idea how right I was. We found our camp for the night in a depression surrounded by low rock formations. Not quite defensible, but better than being exposed on flat ground. The sun was still above the horizon, but Badu had insisted we stop here, and for once, Weatherby didn't argue. The track we'd found had shaken something loose in all of us, some fundamental assumption about the nature of reality in this place. As we set up the tents, I noticed how differently we moved compared to previous camps. Before, there had been casual conversation, even laughter. Now we worked in near silence, broken only by necessary instructions. Every man kept glancing toward the northwest, toward the direction from which that track had come. The Mongolian guides refused to set up their tents at all. Instead, they arranged their bedrolls in a tight circle around a fire pit, facing outward like spokes on a wheel. Bada drew something in the sand around their camp. Symbols I didn't recognize, harsh angular shapes that looked more like warnings than words. "What's he doing?" Weatherby asked Dmitri. The translator watched for a moment before responding, his voice barely above a whisper. "Protection symbols, taught by the shamans. He says they won't stop the Olgoi-Khorkhoi, but they might delay it. Give warning." "Superstitious nonsense," Dr. Chin muttered, but I noticed he didn't say it very loudly, and his hands trembled slightly as he organized his specimen jars. Pembroke was checking his camera equipment with unusual intensity, cleaning lenses that were already clean, adjusting tripod legs that didn't need adjustment. "I say, Edmund," he called to me. "You're the cartographer. Are we even on any maps? Official ones? I pulled out my charts and examined them in the failing light. We'd passed beyond the last surveyed territory 2 days ago. I pointed to where I estimated our current position. Here, or somewhere near here, but this entire region," I gestured at the blank space on the map, "is terra incognita, unexplored, unknown, unnamed," Weatherby added, coming to look over my shoulder. "Which means whatever we discover here, whatever we document, it'll bear our names. Future explorers will follow our maps. If they're foolish enough," I thought but didn't say. As darkness fell, we built our fire larger than necessary. Not for warmth but for light, for the psychological comfort of pushing back the shadows. We'd brought provisions for a hot meal, but no one had much appetite. We ate mechanically, chewing without tasting, our eyes constantly scanning the perimeter of firelight. The stars emerged above us in profusion, that spectacular display you only see in places far from civilization. The Milky Way sprawled across the sky like spilled milk, and under other circumstances, I would have found it beautiful. Tonight, all that vastness overhead only made me feel smaller, more vulnerable, more aware of how far we were from anything resembling safety. "Tell us more about the death worm," Dr. Chan said suddenly, addressing Dmitri. "I want to understand what we're supposedly dealing with. All the details, no matter how absurd they might sound." Dmitri conferred with Batu, and what followed was the most comprehensive and unsettling description we'd yet heard. "The Olgoi-Khorkhoi lives beneath the sand," Dmitri translated, his Russian accent thickening as he struggled with some of the concepts. "It moves through the earth like a fish through water. Most of the time, you never see it, you only know it's there when it's too late. It's said to be most active during the hottest months, June and July, which is now. Some say it's drawn to the color yellow, to metal, to moisture. No one knows for certain because those who get close enough to study it don't survive." We stayed silent, motionless, each scream and plea tearing at our resolve. Because if one of those calls was real, if one of us genuinely needed help, our silence would condemn them to death. Around what I estimated to be 3 in the morning, something new happened. The ground began to vibrate. It started as a barely perceptible tremor, like distant thunder transmitted through the earth. Then it grew stronger, more rhythmic. Something was moving beneath us, tunneling through the sand and rock, circling our position. "It's underneath us," Pembroke said, his voice climbing toward panic. "Jesus Christ, it's underneath us." We scrambled to our feet, weapons raised, spinning in circles as the vibration moved around the perimeter of our camp. The sand rippled in waves, following the path of something massive moving below the surface. Then the smell hit us, a nauseating mixture of sulfur and rot and something else, something organic and alien that made my stomach heave. The creature was venting gases from its tunnels, or perhaps from its own body, polluting the air around us. "Masks!" Chun shouted, pulling a handkerchief over his nose and mouth. "Cover your faces!" We fumbled for cloth, pressing anything we could find against our noses as the stench intensified. My eyes watered, my throat burned. I could taste it on my tongue, acrid and vile. The vibration circled us 3 times, each pass closer than the last, and then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the movement. We stood there, gasping through our makeshift masks, knowing that the creature was directly beneath us, separated only by feet of sand and stone. Waiting, listening, learning. "What's it doing?" Pembroke whispered. "Studying us," Chin replied. "Understanding our positions, our defenses. It's intelligent, more intelligent than we thought. It's not attacking randomly, it's strategizing." The weight of that realization settled over us like a shroud. We weren't dealing with a simple predator operating on instinct. We were dealing with something that could think, plan, and adapt. Something that was treating our encounter as a game of chess, moving its pieces carefully while we flailed in ignorance. The rest of the night passed in agonizing suspense. The voices continued sporadically, but they seemed almost like a distraction now, a secondary tactic while the creature prepared something else. The real threat was the silence between the voices, the knowledge that something was down there, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When dawn finally came, we were beyond exhausted. We'd been awake for over 48 hours, fueled only by fear and desperation. Our supplies were running low. Our psychological defenses were crumbling, and we were no closer to understanding how to defeat the creature or escape it. Weatherby called a meeting as the sun rose, his face haggard and aged 10 years in 3 days. "Gentlemen, I'm not going to pretend anymore. We're in serious trouble. That thing out there is toying with us. Could probably kill us whenever it wants, but it's drawn out the game. Maybe it enjoys the fear. Maybe it needs to study prey before attacking. I don't know, and I don't care anymore. What I care about is getting us out of here alive. We leave today," I said firmly. "Right now. We pack only essentials and we move fast. Put as much distance between us and this place as we can before nightfall." "Agreed," Pembroke said immediately, and even Chun nodded, but Weatherby held up a hand. "There's a problem. Look." He pointed to the horizon in every direction. During the night, while we'd been focused on our immediate perimeter, the creature had been busy. All around us, at regular intervals, the sand had been disturbed. Fresh mounds and depressions marked the landscape like a minefield. "It's cut us off," Chin said slowly. "Those could be tunnels, dens, pits, anything. If we try to leave, we'll have to cross that terrain blind. One wrong step and we could fall into a trap. Or trigger an attack," Weatherby added. "It's herded us into this position deliberately. We're surrounded." The full horror of our situation crystallized in that moment. The creature hadn't been randomly hunting us. It had been positioning us, slowly and patiently, into exactly the position it wanted. And now it had us trapped, cut off from escape, our options reduced to nothing. "Then we wait for it," I said, surprised by the calmness in my own voice. "We wait, and when it comes, we fight. We have rifles, revolvers. We're not helpless." Against something that can generate electricity and spit acid? Pembroke said hollowly. Against something that's survived in this desert for who knows how long, that's perfected hunting and killing? Yes, Weatherby said, and some of his old steel returned to his voice. Because we're British, damn it, and we don't surrender to monsters. We document it, we study its attack pattern, and if we die, at least we die with our eyes open and our rifles in our hands. It was madness, of course. Suicidal bravado born of desperation. But it was also the only option we had left. We spent the day preparing for what we knew would be our final stand. We arranged our remaining ammunition, checked and rechecked our weapons, and wrote letters to loved ones that would probably never be delivered. Pembroke set up his camera on a tripod, aimed at the most likely approach route. "If I die," he said, adjusting the exposure, "at least there will be photographs, evidence. Maybe someone will find them someday and learn what happened here." As the sun began to set, we took our positions, 4 points around the fire, backs to each other, rifles ready. The amulets Batu had given us hung around our necks, probably worthless, but we wore them anyway. The last light faded from the sky, and the stars emerged overhead, cold and distant and utterly indifferent to our fate. And in the darkness beyond our firelight, something began to move. The voices started again, but this time they were different. They weren't trying to lure us anymore. They were mocking us. "You're going to die tonight," my own voice called from the darkness. "All of you, and no one will ever know. No one will ever find your bones. We've been waiting for you," Weatherby's voice echoed. "This is our place. You don't belong here. Photograph this," Pembroke's voice laughed. "Document your own extinction." The psychological game had evolved into something crueler. The creature had learned enough about us to understand not just our fears, but our pride, our sense of purpose. And now it was destroying even that, reducing our scientific mission to a meaningless joke. Then, through the chorus of stolen voices, we heard something new. A sound that wasn't mimicry or imitation. A sound that was purely, terribly authentic. A hissing, low and sustained, like steam escaping from a valve, but organic, alive. And it was getting closer. "Here it comes," Chin whispered, raising his rifle. "Whatever happens, aim for the head if it has one. The body if it doesn't. And for God's sake, don't let it touch you." The hissing grew louder, and the ground began to vibrate again. Sand started to cascade down from a mound about 30 feet away, falling into a depression that was rapidly growing wider. Something was emerging. We saw it piece by piece, revealed in the flickering firelight like a nightmare coming into focus. First, the head, if you could call it that. A blunt, eyeless protrusion, dark red and glistening, with what might have been sensory organs or mouths or something else entirely. No eyes that we could see, but it moved with purpose, with direction, tracking us despite its apparent blindness. Then the body sliding up from beneath the sand. Thick as a man's torso, segmented like an intestine. That description was horrifyingly accurate, and covered in a slick, almost metallic sheen that reflected the firelight in nauseating ripples. It kept coming, more and more of it emerging from the pit it had created, until we could see at least 20 feet of the creature, and still there was more below the surface. The segments pulsed rhythmically, and we could see something glowing beneath the translucent skin, bioluminescence perhaps, or electrical discharge building up. "My God!" Weatherby breathed. "It's real. It's actually real." The Olgoi-Khorkhoi, the Mongolian death worm, was no legend. It was here, it was massive, and it was looking at us. Somehow, without eyes, it was looking at us. And then it opened what we'd thought was its head, revealing not a mouth but a cavity lined with rows of needle-like projections. And from deep within came that voice again. My mother's voice, perfect and clear. "Edmund, aren't you going to introduce me to your friends?" The creature's voice, my mother's voice, emerging from that alien cavity was the final straw that broke our paralysis. Weatherby fired first, the crack of his revolver shattering the night. The bullet struck the creature's midsection, and what happened next defied everything we thought we knew about biology. The impact point erupted in a shower of sparks, actual electrical discharge, blue-white and crackling. The creature recoiled, its segments contracting violently, and that hissing sound intensified into a shriek that felt like needles being driven into our ears. "Shoot!" Weatherby roared, and we opened fire. 4 rifles and 2 revolvers poured lead into the creature, and each impact produced that same electrical reaction. The thing writhed, its massive body whipping back and forth, and where it struck the ground, the sand turned black and glassy. Heat radiated from it in waves, and I realized with horror that the creature was literally cooking the earth around it. But it wasn't dying. If anything, our attack seemed to be energizing it. The glow beneath its skin intensified, pulsing brighter with each bullet strike, and I understood with sickening clarity what was happening. "Stop shooting!" Dr. Chun screamed. "We're charging it. The kinetic energy. We're feeding it." We ceased fire, but the damage was done. The creature had absorbed our assault and converted it into something else, something worse. The segments of its body were glowing now like heated metal, and the air around it shimmered with thermal distortion. It reared up, impossibly high, at least 15 feet of its body rising vertical from the pit. The eyeless head swept back and forth, that cavity opening wider, and I could see down its throat, or whatever that opening was, into a hellish interior that pulsed with bioluminescent organs. Then it spat. A stream of something, not quite liquid, not quite gas, shot from its mouth toward Pembroke. He tried to dodge, but the substance caught his left arm, and the scream that tore from his throat was inhuman. The fabric of his shirt dissolved instantly, and his skin began to blister and blacken, smoking in the night air. Chun and I grabbed him, dragging him away from the creature as he thrashed in agony. The corrosive substance was eating through flesh, down to the bone, and there was nothing we could do except watch in horror. "Water!" I shouted. "Pour water on it!" Weatherby grabbed our canteen and dumped it over Pembroke's arm, but the reaction only made things worse. The substance fizzed and bubbled, spreading further, and Pembroke's screams reached a pitch I didn't think human vocal cords could produce. The creature was advancing now, pulling more of its body from the pit. We could see 30 feet of it now, maybe 40, and still there seemed to be no end. It moved with disturbing grace for something so massive, undulating across the sand like a wave of living flesh. "The fire!" Weatherby shouted. "Drive it toward the fire!" We began firing again, not trying to kill it now but to hurt it, to force it away from Pembroke's thrashing form. The creature responded to each shot, flinching away from the impacts, and we managed to angle it toward our campfire. When it reached the flames, something extraordinary happened. The creature recoiled violently, that shriek intensifying to a level that made our ears bleed. It retreated rapidly, segments bunching and expanding as it tried to distance itself from the heat. And I realized it feared fire. Despite being able to generate its own heat, despite cooking the sand beneath it, something about open flame caused it genuine distress. "More fire!" I yelled. "We need more fire!" We grabbed everything that would burn, our tents, supplies, even some of our documentation, and threw it onto the flames. The fire roared higher, casting dancing shadows across the creature's writhing form, and it retreated further, heading back toward its pit. But it wasn't fleeing. We'd heard it, frightened it perhaps, but we hadn't defeated it. And now it was angry. The creature's body began to pulse more rapidly, that internal glow building to an intensity that was almost blinding. The segments expanded and contracted like a heart beating in fast forward, and a low thrumming sound filled the air. Not quite a hum, not quite a vibration, but something that made our teeth ache and our vision blur. "It's building a charge," Chun said, his voice distant, clinical even in the face of death, like a biological capacitor. "When it releases..." He never finished the sentence. The creature discharged. Lightning, there was no other word for it, arced from its body in multiple directions simultaneously. One bolt struck a pile of our supplies, incinerating them instantly. Another hit the ground near Weatherby, throwing him backward with the force of the impact. A third passed so close to my head that I felt my hair stand on end and smelled the ozone in the air. And one struck Pembroke. He'd been lying where we dragged him, his ruined arm cradled against his chest, moaning softly. The electrical bolt hit him square in the chest, and his body went rigid, his back arching impossibly as current flowed through him. For a moment, and this is the image that still haunts my nightmares, he was illuminated from within, his skeleton visible through his skin like an X-ray photograph. Then he collapsed, smoke rising from his body, and I knew without checking that he was dead. No! Weatherby's roar was primal, anguished. He grabbed his rifle and charged the creature, firing wildly, no longer trying to hurt or scare it but simply to hurt it, to make it pay for what it had done. The creature turned its attention fully to him, that cavity opening wide, preparing to spit its corrosive venom again. But Weatherby was beyond caring, beyond fear, beyond reason. He kept advancing, kept firing, even as the creature reared up above him like a cobra preparing to strike. Chun and I ran forward, knowing we couldn't reach him in time, knowing we were about to watch another friend die. The creature's segments contracted, preparing to propel its venom, and then something unexpected happened. One of Weatherby's wild shots struck the creature's head dead center, right in that open cavity. The bullet penetrated deep, and the creature's reaction was immediate and catastrophic. It convulsed violently, its entire body whipping in massive arcs that threw sand and rocks in all directions. That shriek reached a new pitch, a sound of genuine agony, and it began to retreat rapidly back toward its pit. But its movements were uncoordinated now, desperate. We'd actually heard it found a vulnerable spot in that armored hide. The mouth, Chin shouted. Its interior is vulnerable. Aim for the mouth. We positioned ourselves in a triangle around the creature, which was now thrashing between us and its escape tunnel. Every time that cavity opened, whether to shriek or prepare to spit venom, we fired into it. Not all our shots connected, but enough did. We could see internal damage now, fluids leaking from the wounds, that bioluminescent glow flickering and dimming. The creature tried to discharge electricity again, but the arcs were weaker now, unfocused, as though its biological systems were failing. It tried to spit venom, but the stream fell short, pooling on the ground where it hissed and bubbled. We kept firing, kept advancing, driven by fear and rage and the desperate will to survive. Pembroke's body lay behind us, a constant reminder of what would happen if we failed. And slowly, agonizingly, we began to win. The creature's movements became more sluggish. The glow beneath its skin dimmed to barely visible pulses. That cavity hung open now, unable to close, and we could see the devastation our bullets had caused to its interior. Whatever organs it used to generate its poison, its electricity, its stolen voices, we damaged them beyond function. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the creature stopped moving. It lay there, half in and half out of its pit, segments still twitching with residual nerve impulses, but clearly dying. We approached cautiously, weapons raised, ready for one final attack. But it never came. The Olgoi-Khorkhoi, the terror of the Gobi, the monster that had existed in legend for generations, was dead. Or so we thought. As we stood there, catching our breath, staring at the massive corpse, its mouth opened one final time, and from deep within came a voice. Not stolen, not mimicked, but its own voice, something ancient and alien and utterly inhuman. More, coming, nest, below. Then it went still, and the light in its body faded completely. We looked at each other, the implications sinking in slowly. This creature, the one we'd barely survived, the one that had killed Pembroke and nearly killed us all, wasn't alone. There were more. A nest, underground, perhaps dozens of them. "We need to leave," Chin said, his voice shaking. "Right now. We need to run and not stop running until we're back in Ulaanbaatar." "Pembroke," Weatherby began, looking at our fallen companion. "Is dead?" I said, hating the words even as I spoke them. "And we'll join him if we don't move. Now." We didn't discuss it further. We grabbed what we could carry. Some water, some ammunition, our notes, and a few of Pembroke's photographs, and we ran. We ran across that mined landscape, expecting every step to plunge us into a pit or trigger another attack. We ran through the darkness, guided only by starlight and terror, putting as much distance as we could between ourselves and that place. Behind us, we heard sounds, hissing, multiple sources. The nest was waking up. We ran faster. The night became a blur of exhaustion and panic. We stumbled, fell, picked ourselves up, and kept going. The sounds behind us grew fainter, but we didn't dare stop. When dawn finally came, we were miles away, collapsed in a dried riverbed, gasping for air, our bodies pushed beyond their limits. Did we actually kill it? Weatherby asked between breaths. Or did it just stop? I don't know, Chen admitted. Its biology is unlike anything in recorded science. Could have been dying, or it could have been conserving energy, hibernating until it heals. The thought was too terrible to contemplate. The idea that we might have only wounded it, that it might be even now regenerating, preparing to hunt us again. We tell no one, I said suddenly. Both men looked at me. About what we found out there, about what happened to Pembroke. We tell no one. Edmund, Weatherby protested. Listen to me, I interrupted. If we report this, if we tell the Royal Geographical Society that we found the Olgoi-Khorkhoi, what happens? They send another expedition. Better armed, better prepared, but still human, still vulnerable. And those creatures, that nest, will kill them all. Every single one. We have a responsibility to science, Chan said weakly, but I could see he didn't believe it anymore. We have a responsibility to the living, I countered, to not send more people to die in that place. Batu and his people knew. That's why they stayed away. That's why they tried to warn us. We didn't listen, and Pembroke paid the price. We can't let anyone else pay it. The debate continued for hours as we rested, regaining enough strength to continue our journey. But in the end, we reached a consensus. Some knowledge was too dangerous to share. Some places were meant to remain unexplored. We spent 3 more days crossing the Gobi, rationing our meager supplies, jumping at every sound. We saw no sign of pursuit, no evidence that the creatures had followed us, but we never felt safe. Not until we saw the outskirts of Ulaanbaatar on the horizon did we allow ourselves to believe we might actually survive. Batu was waiting at the same inn where we'd first met him. He took one look at us. 3 men who'd left us 6, our clothes torn, our faces gaunt, our eyes haunted, and he nodded slowly as if he'd expected this. Through Dimitri, who'd also waited for us, Batu asked only one question. Did you see it? Yes, Weatherby replied simply. And do you believe now? Yes. Batu nodded again and said something in Mongolian. Dimitri translated. He says you're lucky. Most who see the Olgoi-Khorkhoi don't return. You must have been blessed. Or perhaps the desert decided to let you live so you could warn others. We returned to England 6 weeks later. Our expedition officially recorded as a partial success with tragic losses. Pembroke's death was attributed to an accident, a fall from a rock formation that resulted in fatal injuries. The photographs he'd taken of the creature were mysteriously ruined, the film damaged by heat and sand, or so we claimed. In truth, I'd destroyed them myself one night while Chan and Weatherby slept. The world didn't need to see what we'd seen. The world didn't need to know that such things existed. We went our separate ways after that. Dr. Chun returned to teaching at Cambridge, though his lectures took on a different tone, more philosophical, less certain about humanity's place in the natural order. Captain Weatherby retired from exploration and never spoke publicly about the expedition. And I continued my work as a cartographer, carefully ensuring that certain areas of the Gobi Desert remained blank spaces on my maps. Unmarked, unexplored, unknown. 20 years have passed since that summer of 1912. I'm an old man now, my hair gray, my hands gnarled with arthritis. I sit in my study in London, surrounded by maps and journals, and I can still hear it sometimes. That hissing, that shriek, those stolen voices calling from the darkness. Dr. Chun died 5 years ago. Heart failure, the doctor said, but I knew better. I saw his body at the funeral, saw the branching scars across his chest that looked like lightning strikes. The creature's electrical discharge had damaged him more than we'd realized. and the injury had slowly destroyed his heart over the years. Weatherby lasted longer. He passed just last year, and at his funeral, his daughter, the woman whose voice the creature had used that night, thanked me for being his friend. She said he'd often wake up screaming, calling out warnings in languages she didn't understand. She said that toward the end, he'd become obsessed with fire, keeping every light in his house burning through the night. He'd understood, as I do, that the darkness isn't empty, that there are things in the unexplored places of the world that humanity is better off not knowing about. But the nightmares persist. Not every night, but often enough. I dream of the Gobi, of that nest beneath the sand, of Pembroke's body glowing from within as electricity coursed through him. And I dream of the creature's final words, "More. Coming. Nest. Below." Were there more of them? Did our encounter disturb something that had been dormant? I don't know, and I pray I never find out. What I do know is this: there are places on Earth that don't belong to us. Places that have their own rules, their own inhabitants, their own right to exist undisturbed. The Olgoi-Khorkhoi is real, of that I have no doubt. But it's also something we're not meant to understand, not meant to document, not meant to disturb. The Mongolian nomads knew this. They'd known it for generations, passing down warnings that we dismissed as superstition. They understood that some boundaries exist for a reason, that some forbidden territories are forbidden because crossing them carries a price too terrible to pay. We paid that price. Pembroke paid it with his life. Chun and Weatherby paid it with their health and sanity. And I pay it still, every night when I close my eyes and see that massive, writhing form emerging from the sand. Hear my mother's voice emerging from an alien throat. Feel the heat of that electrical discharge as it turned a man into a smoking corpse. I've written this account not to share with the world, but to leave behind as a warning. This manuscript will be sealed with instructions that it's not to be opened until 50 years after my death. By then, I hope the world will have changed enough that this warning is no longer necessary. Or perhaps changed so much that it's more necessary than ever. If you're reading this, if you're planning an expedition to the Gobi Desert or any other remote place where locals warn of monsters, heed these words. Listen to the warnings. Respect the boundaries. Some places are forbidden for a reason. The Mongolian death worm is real. I swear this on my life, on my honor, on the graves of my fallen companions. It's real and it's not alone. There's a nest beneath the sands, and God help us all if humanity ever fully awakens it. We barely survived encountering one. An entire nest would be, I can't even imagine. I don't want to imagine. So I'm begging you, whoever you are, whatever year you're reading this in, leave the Gobi alone. Leave the unexplored spaces unexplored. Some knowledge isn't worth the cost of acquisition. Some monsters are real, and some monsters should remain in the dark. Among Edmund Hartley's papers, discovered after his death in 1956, were several unsent letters. These excerpts reveal the psychological toll the expedition took on the survivors. From Edmund Hartley to Dr. Albert Chun, dated March 1915, never sent Dear Albert. I had the dream again last night. The same one I've had 100 times. We're back at that camp, and the voices are calling. But this time, when Pembroke is struck by the lightning, he doesn't die. He stands up, his skeleton still glowing through his skin, and he asks me why I didn't save him. I wake up trying to answer, trying to explain that there was nothing I could do. But there's no answer that satisfies, is there? We brought him there. We led him to his death as surely as if we'd shot him ourselves. Do you still hear them? The voices? Sometimes I swear I hear my mother calling from the next room, and I have to remind myself that she's been dead for years, and that what used her voice in the Gobi was never her at all. I think about going back sometimes, properly equipped this time, with dynamite, with flamethrowers, with an army if necessary, to destroy that nest before something worse happens. But then I remember how easily it killed Pembroke, how close we all came to dying, and I realized that even an army might not be enough. Some things should remain buried, old friend, even if they haunt us forever. Yours in remembrance, Edmund, from Captain James Weatherby to Edmund Hartley, dated July 1918, never sent Edmund. I'm writing to you from a field hospital in France. Took some shrapnel at the Somme, Nothing that will kill me, though there were moments I wished it would. The other soldiers, they fear the Germans, the gas attacks, the artillery. I find myself almost amused by their terror. They don't know what real fear is. They've never seen something that defies every law of nature. Never heard their loved ones' voices twisted into weapons. Never watched a friend die screaming as electricity turned his insides to ash. The trenches here, all these tunnels dug into the earth, they remind me of that place. Sometimes at night, I convince myself I can hear hissing from below, feel vibrations through the ground. The other men think I'm shell-shocked. Maybe I am, but not from this war. Margaret's voice called to me that night. You remember, my wife, dead 3 years by then, killed by influenza while I was mapping territories in Africa. The creature knew exactly what to say, exactly how she'd phrase things. I forgive you, it said with her voice, but she never forgave me, Edmund. I wasn't there when she needed me most. I was exploring, adventuring, pursuing glory, and she died alone. The creature understood that guilt, weaponized it. It knew my weakness before I'd even acknowledged it to myself. How? How did it know? I'll never know the answer, and perhaps that's the cruelest part of all. Stay safe, old friend, and keep our secret. The world isn't ready to know. James from Dr. Albert Chun to Edmund Hartley, dated November 1932, never sent my dear Edmund. My physician tells me I have perhaps a year left. My heart is failing, hardly surprising given what it was subjected to 20 years ago. I can see the branching scars when I look in the mirror, like lightning frozen in my flesh. My students think they're birthmarks. I've never corrected them. I've spent these 2 decades trying to rationalize what we encountered. I've read every text on desert fauna, every account of unusual species, every fringe theory about electricity in biological systems. And I've come to a conclusion that would have horrified my younger self. Some things can't be rationalized. Some things exist outside the frameworks we've built to understand the world. The Olgoi-Khorkhoi, it wasn't just a creature. It was something older, something that evolved in conditions we can't replicate or study. It existed in a world parallel to ours, following rules we don't understand and can never understand. And I think, God help me, I think it might have been trying to communicate with us. Not to hunt, not to kill, but to warn us away. To tell us we didn't belong there. We didn't listen. We brought our weapons, our certainty, our British superiority. And Pembroke paid the price for our arrogance. I dream of him often. His last moments, his body conducting electricity it was never meant to withstand. And I wonder, did he understand, in that final instant, what we'd done wrong? Did he realize we'd been the intruders all along?
I'm rambling.
The morphine does that. But I wanted you to know, Edmund, we made the right choice not to tell. Whatever glory or recognition we might have gained, it wouldn't have been worth the lives that would have been lost in follow-up expeditions. Some doors are better left unopened. Some monsters are better left undisturbed. With affection and regret, Albert Edmund Hartley's final journal entry, dated September 8, 1956, 3 days before his death. My hand shakes as I write this. Whether from age or fear, I cannot say. Perhaps both. I received a letter today from a young explorer, a grandson of one of the Russian translators who worked with us in Mongolia. He's planning an expedition to the Gobi. He wants to map the blank spaces that still exist on current charts. He found my name in the archives and wrote asking for guidance. I've spent all day composing a reply. I told him to stay away from the northwestern regions. I cited hostile terrain and difficult conditions. I did everything but tell him the truth, because who would believe the truth? An old man's tale of monsters and mimicry and electrical storms from living flesh? They'd dismiss it as senility, as the fantasies of a mind beginning to fail. But it's not fantasy. It was real. Real. Tonight I heard it again. My mother's voice, calling from the hallway outside my study. I know it's not real, or rather, I know my mother isn't really there. But for a moment, just a moment, I was back in the Gobi, surrounded by darkness, listening to voices that shouldn't exist. Is it hunting me still? After all these years, all these miles, has the creature somehow tracked me here? Or is it just memory, trauma, The ghost of that encounter haunting me to my grave? I don't know anymore. I'm not sure I ever knew. But I'm certain of this. I'll die without having told the full truth. This manuscript will be sealed, hidden away, released only after everyone who knew me is gone. And perhaps even then, it should remain hidden. Because the truth is too terrible. Not just that such creatures exist, but that they're intelligent. That they understand us better than we understand ourselves. That they can reach into our minds and pull out our deepest fears, our hidden guilts, our secret shames, and use them as weapons. The Mongolians call it the death worm. But death is too simple a word for what it does. It doesn't just kill. It breaks you first, piece by piece, using everything you are against you. And then, when you're hollow and terrified and broken, then it kills you. Unless you're very, very lucky. Unless the desert decides to let you live. I've been living on borrowed time for 44 years now. And soon, very soon, my debt will come due. I only hope that when I die here in London, surrounded by civilization and light. Not in the dark. Not in the sand. Not hearing those voices calling. Calling, always calling. God save anyone who doesn't heed these warnings. God save us all. Edmund Hartley died in his sleep on September 11, 1956, at the age of 73. His death was attributed to natural causes, heart failure in his sleep. His housekeeper found him the next morning, peaceful in his bed. But she also noted something strange in her report to the authorities. Every light in the house had been turned on, burning through the night. And on his bedside table sat a leather amulet, worn and ancient, clutched in his hand. The amulet that Batu had given him 44 years earlier, meant to ward off the things that live beneath the sand. Whether it protected him to the end, or whether it simply gave him comfort in his final moments, we'll never know. But this manuscript survived. This warning survived. And somewhere in the Gobi Desert, beneath the burning sands, something else survives too. Waiting, watching, remembering. Do you think the creature is still out there? Do you believe Edmund Hartley's story? Leave your thoughts below, and remember, some legends exist for a reason. Some warnings should be heeded, and some places should remain unexplored.